So the war's coming to a very quick end here because the Allied forces have now invaded France, they've taken back Paris, and they're pushing eastward towards Germany. Okay? So we're going to close in on Hitler. By December of 1944, both fronts are concentrating on squeezing Germany. The Russians, or the Soviets, are coming from the east, and the Americans and the Allies are coming from the west. So definitely a two-front war. The game is on, and Hitler really has no place to go. Now, he's going to make one last stand at the Ardennes Forest. Same place, basically, that the Battle of the Ardennes Forest took place in World War I. He's going to do it again in World War II. It was so dense and thick that they thought they could pull this off. So this is his last stand. Doesn't work. His forces are able to push Eisenhower's forces back enough through the Ardennes Forest that it creates a bulge in the Allied forces, a backwards bulge in the Allied forces. So he's able to drive them back, but Brigadier General A.C. McAuliffe, he takes on this Battle of the Bulge, and he's able to push back, flatten it out, and then push on towards Berlin. So Eisenhower and the Soviets are going to meet up eventually in Berlin. The Soviets would be there first. They would get there in April of 1945, and then we would be quickly behind them. It's when we penetrate into Germany and we get around Berlin, we get north of Munich to the northwest. That's when we first start seeing the concentration camps with our own eyes. We had heard about them, we'd heard stories of them, but we had never seen them with our own eyes before. No American had really laid eyes on these things. And this is the first horrific view we had of the concentration camps and the destruction that was taking place. Now remember, these are the last days of the war. You're talking about the spring of 1945. Hitler is on the defense. He is very anxious to execute his final solution, which was getting rid of all Jews in Germany. And he was really in a hurry to go about the mass executions of these prisoners that he had. Unfortunately, he's able to kill about 15 million people in the concentration camps in total, and those were gypsies, twins, homosexuals, Jews, you name it. If he thought that they were bad for society, he was going after them. But this is the first time we had really seen the starvation effects, the ill treatment, the plan to execute taking effect as far as the gas chambers and the evidence of the kilns and so forth, the mass graveyards. Really horrific. When news reached the United States general population about what was going on, it was really horrifying. So, notable dates in April of 1945. So you've got a couple here. So in April, the Soviets are going to reach Berlin, and we would be right on their heels, essentially, so to speak. We were actually at their front, but we would all reach Berlin, and the war would essentially be over. However, on April 12th of 1945, FDR dies of a cerebral hemorrhage. He was at his spa that he had built in Warm Springs, Georgia. He was with his mistress, oopsie, and he would die down there. So we have a new president in the White House, that would be Truman, who's inaugurated into office. On April 30th, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun, who he had just made his wife, he had just married her a couple days before this, they commit suicide in Hitler's bunker. They were holding out there hoping for one last stand by Germany to be successful. It didn't work, so they commit suicide because he knew what his fate would be. May 7th of 45, Germany's going to surrender unconditionally. Those were the terms. You cannot have any conditions if you lose the war. And on May 8th of 1945, that got a little smeary, it's VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. So we recognize that still today it's a celebrated day in Europe as Victory in Europe. And interestingly enough, it's tomorrow. At least in 2013 it is. Japan, the U-boats are going to take 1,042 Japanese ships. Those are our U-boats, our submarines, the United States. They do complete damage to the Japanese naval fleet. We were leading daily bombing raids at this point into the heart of Japan and just devastating them city by city. They still would not give up. Clearly they had been beaten, but they would not give up. They wouldn't submit to the unconditional surrender. And that's a problem. We weren't going to accept anything less. Now, MacArthur, he gets together about 250,000 troops, so a 250,000 men and a whole mess of ships, and he steams towards the Philippines in the early summer of 1945. We see a couple of huge battles here that take place. One is Leyte Gulf, and Leyte Gulf is probably the preeminent naval battle ever fought on this planet. It was huge. Takes place over a series of days. There were a whole mess of ships that were lost in this one, but it is probably the biggest naval battle we've ever seen in history. Iwo Jima happens in March of 1945. We go in there. We lose between Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and there's one more battle in here that I'm forgetting. Well, the Philippines themselves. So between the Philippines, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, we lose about 150,000 men. It's actually about 144,000. It's tough. These were tough battles. We lose about 70,000 in the Philippines. We lose about another 80,000 here in Okinawa, and then Iwo Jima we lose about 4,000. Iwo Jima, of course, is the image we all know and love of the Battle of Iwo Jima, with the American GIs raising the flag, the Marines raising the flag on the island. Okinawa, this is where we see a lot of the kamikaze pilots from Japan, the ones that would basically commit suicide in order to complete their mission. They would fly into the sides of aircraft carriers, into destroyers. They would sacrifice themselves and their planes in order to achieve their mission. You can see how we thought maybe the battles in Japan, if we invaded Japan proper with our men, boots on the ground, invaded, that we would be thinking we would lose hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million men. There was expected to be, the War Department at one point put out an estimate that we would lose about 1 million men in casualties if we invaded Japan. So this is where Truman and FDR get a little nervous about, do we want to send in the troops on the ground to attack Japan? If we can do it any other way, let's take that option, because we don't want to lose that many men. So the Potsdam Conference is held. This is before the war ends. The Potsdam Conference is going to be held. It's going to be present at that conference is going to be Truman, because FDR has died, Joseph Stalin, and then England sends two guys. They send Winston Churchill, who was the prime minister, but there had been elections and they were still waiting for the results of those elections. So they send his opponent, Clement Attlee, to also attend the conference. And the leadership actually changes in the conference because Clement Attlee was actually elected as the new prime minister in England. So he would be the player here at Potsdam. The ultimatum to Japan is what they're going to issue. You will either surrender or you will be destroyed. That's it. There's no other way out of this war, and they knew Japan was desperate to get out, but they just wouldn't go for the unconditional surrender. They also set up some plans for Germany. How are we going to bring Germany back to life economically, because we saw what happened when you destroy her, but yet keep her submissive to the rest of the world so she can't do what she's done now twice. And we also have plans for Poland, because Germany had taken over Poland, pushed the Soviet Union out. What's going to happen to Poland? So they figure out what the plans are going to be there, and basically they sacrifice Poland to the communists. Now, the Potsdam Declaration comes out of this, and these are the terms of surrender for Japan. These were pretty easy to come up with because, frankly, the United States got to dictate them. We were the ones who whooped Japan, therefore we get to dictate the terms. We didn't really have any help from any other country in the fight against Japan. So in early 1940, FDR had gone to Albert Einstein, and begged him basically to get involved with the Manhattan Project. Now, the Manhattan Project employed about 130,000 people. It was huge. There were a couple different plants. One was in Washington State that produced an atom bomb. One was in Tennessee. They did some work there, producing an atom bomb. But the first explosion that we would see after Einstein and his group got done producing these bombs, they made 3 of them, was at Alamogordo, New Mexico. That was on July 16th. We exploded the first atomic bomb. Now, Truman felt it was necessary to tell Stalin, look, we have this weapon that can do more destruction than any other weapon on the face of the earth ever. We felt maybe you would want to know about it. Little did he know that Stalin already knew. Stalin was well aware that we had the atomic bomb because he had spies working on these projects that sold him information about how to develop their own atomic bomb, and that would come into play later in 1949. They would explode their first atomic weapon. So we send out a warning to Japan. We basically drop, our Air Force flies over Japan and drops leaflets all over Japan's major cities saying, look, your government won't surrender. They won't submit. So we're going to have to destroy you in order to win this war. We don't really want to do that, but that's what your government's putting to us. So they flew over Hiroshima. They flew over Nagasaki, the cities they were planning to hit. Now, August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay was the plane that carried the atomic bombs, both atomic bombs, the Fat Boy and Little Man. The Enola Gay carries the bombs. They were, of course, the atomic bombs were taken to Asia, to the islands in Asia, by the USS Annapolis, which was a ship that was a very secret mission. And they delivered the bomb, and then they left. And when they left their delivery point, they were supposed to serpentine through the seas of Japan and so forth in order to get back out to the open ocean. And because it was so foggy, the captain felt he could not serpentine carefully enough, with enough precaution to not hit something. So he went in more of a straight route, serpentining only occasionally. And he had zero radio contact because this was such a top secret mission, and that USS Annapolis would wind up getting hit by a Japanese U-boat torpedo, and it was sunk. And a lot of the men went into the water. 300 and some men went into the water, and only 180 some were rescued because the rest had were eaten by sharks or drowned. They were in the water for several days. Before a low-flying U.S. plane flew overhead and saw them and said, well, why are there a bunch of Navy guys in the water? What the heck, ship sunk? Because nobody knew about it. Even though the Annapolis was late for their arrival at their destination, nobody called it in because it was so top secret. And these guys, a lot of these guys died because of shark attacks. So watch Jaws, and you'll get the update on how that all happened. Now, at Hiroshima, there's going to be 180,000 people who are killed, missing, or wounded in this attack. 70,000 of those people were what they call sublimated, chemistry term. That means you've taken something from a solid state to a gas state without ever changing it to liquid. Sublimated. Poof, disappeared. Okay? 70,000 people. Vaporized. On August 9th, we hit Nagasaki, the second city that we hit with an atomic bomb. Again, you're talking about tens of thousands of people who were killed in this attack. So huge numbers that we affect Japan with, but the question was us or them. And you can work out the justification for that. On August 10th, Japan finally surrenders, with one condition. The one condition was Hirohito had to remain as the emperor in Japan, and that was their call. So we allowed them to do that, and then everything else was unconditional. So VJ Day takes place on September 2nd. This is the official surrender by Japan. They surrender on board the USS Missouri, and they sign over all the official paperwork that they've surrendered. The United States total in this war, 1 million casualties. It's our most costly war to date. But in comparison, check out the Soviets. The Soviets are a little bit bitter with us. They suffered 20 million dead. Now, how many of those were war-related and how many of those were Stalin-related, we really don't know. A lot of these guys died because Stalin put them to death, but not 20 million. So Where that true number lies, we don't know. Now, why did the Soviets do so poorly in this war? Because Stalin had killed all of their war officers, all their military officers from World War I, because he didn't trust them. He didn't think that they believed in him to lead, so he killed all his officers. So these guys were fighting with the B team, okay, the backups, and that didn't really work out for the Soviet Union. And anybody who pointed that out to Stalin was killed. So really ugly times in the Soviet Union.